You know when people say, be careful what you wish for. Yeah, well, I learned that lesson the hard way. Sometimes getting exactly what you think you deserve comes with a price tag you never saw coming. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy hearing about my messy life, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. So there I was, 29 and freelancing as a graphic designer, which sounds way more glamorous than it actually is. Between us, it mostly meant working in my pajamas and pretending I had my life together while secretly panicking about rent every month. That's where Emmett came in. He was this finance guy I'd been dating for 3 years. And look, he wasn't exactly what you'd call exciting. The man had spreadsheets for his spreadsheets and actually enjoyed balancing his checkbook. But he was stable, and stability pays the bills. Don't get me wrong, Emmett had his good points. He was reliable always, showed up when he said he would, and never forgot an anniversary. But there was something about his whole vibe that just, I don't know, made me feel like I was settling. Like this was the guy I was supposed to end up with because he made sense on paper, not because he made my heart race. He'd get all excited about compound interest and retirement planning, and I'd just nod along while mentally rolling my eyes. The man wore khakis on weekends by choice, khakis. But here's the thing about Emmett. He was generous, maybe too generous. When I complained about my tiny studio apartment with the broken air conditioning and the neighbors who apparently practiced interpretive dance at 3 a.m, he'd listen with this concerned expression and start researching better neighborhoods for me. When I mentioned wanting to upgrade my ancient laptop that crashed every time I tried to run design software, he'd casually offer to help with the cost. It wasn't like he was throwing money around to show off. He genuinely seemed to want to make my life easier. I guess I got used to it. The way he'd pick up dinner tabs without even thinking about it. How he'd fill up my gas tank. When we took my car somewhere, the little Amazon packages that would show up at my place with things I'd mentioned needing. It felt natural after a while, like this was just how our relationship worked. I handled the fun, spontaneous stuff, and he handled the practical, expensive stuff. The apartment hunting started about 6 months before everything went to hell. I was getting desperate to move out of my shoebox studio, and Emmett was being his usual helpful self, sending me listings and offering to come look at places with me. That's when I found it. This perfect 1-bedroom with a balcony in a trendy part of town. The kind of place where you could actually have people over without being embarrassed. The catch. The rent was way more than I could reliably afford on my inconsistent freelance income. When I told the landlord about my situation, he got that skeptical look that property managers get when they smell financial instability. That's when Emmett stepped in, with his offer to be my guarantor. I remember feeling this rush of relief mixed with something else. Maybe gratitude, maybe guilt, but mostly relief. Because the truth is, I really wanted that apartment, and Emmett was the only person in my life with the credit score and steady income to make it happen. His signature on those papers felt like a gift, like he was investing in our future together. At least that's what I told myself at the time. Moving day was exhausting. Emmett showed up bright and early with a rental truck, and this systematic approach to packing that was both impressive and slightly annoying. He had labeled boxes, an inventory list, and a plan for the most efficient way to load everything. Meanwhile, I was still throwing random stuff into garbage bags and hoping for the best. But I had to admit his method worked. We got everything moved in one trip. Then came the decorating phase, which is where Emmett really went above and beyond. I had all these ideas about how I wanted the place to look, this whole Pinterest-worthy aesthetic with specific furniture and decor. The problem was my budget, which was basically non-existent after paying the security deposit. That's when Emmett stepped in again. "Don't worry about it," he said when I started stressing about the cost of the couch I'd fallen in love with. "Consider it a housewarming gift." And then he said the same thing about the dining table, the bedroom set, and those ridiculously expensive linen curtains I'd been obsessing over. His credit card got quite the workout those first few weeks. I spent hours arranging everything just right while Emmett assembled furniture and hung pictures exactly where I wanted them. He was good at that kind of thing, patient and methodical, measuring twice and cutting once. The kind of guy who actually reads instruction manuals instead of just winging it. It was sweet, I guess, watching him concentrate so hard on getting everything perfect for me. The apartment really did turn out beautiful. Better than I'd imagined, actually. When friends came over, they'd gush about how amazing it looked, how lucky I was to have found such a great place, and I was proud of it. It felt like the first time in my adult life that I was living somewhere that actually reflected who I wanted to be, not just what I could afford. But there was this weird undercurrent to the whole thing that I couldn't quite shake. Sometimes I'd catch Emmett looking around the apartment with this satisfied expression, like he was surveying his handiwork. Which, to be fair, he kind of was. His money had paid for most of what we were looking at. His labor had assembled it. His signature had made it possible in the first place. I started noticing little things, how he'd rearrange items on the coffee table when he thought I wasn't looking, how he'd make himself completely at home, leaving his stuff around like he lived there too, how he'd answer the door when maintenance showed up, talking to them like he was the tenant. It was subtle, but it was there, this sense of ownership that went beyond just being a helpful boyfriend. The truth is, I was starting to feel suffocated. Not by the apartment, which I loved, but by the strings that came attached to it. Every time Emmett did something nice, every time he paid for something, or fixed something, or improved something, it felt like another small claim on my space and my independence. Like I was slowly becoming indebted to him in ways that went beyond just money. But I pushed those feelings down, because let's be real, I needed him. The apartment was in my name, but it might as well have been in his, considering how much of his resources had gone into making it livable, and my freelance income was still as unpredictable as ever. Some months were great, others left me counting pennies and hoping clients would pay their invoices on time. So I played the grateful girlfriend role. I thanked him for his generosity, praised his handiwork, and let him feel like the hero of our little domestic story. Because that's what he wanted, right? To be needed, to be useful, to be the stable foundation that made my creative dreams possible. And if that arrangement worked for both of us, then what was the harm? Looking back now, I can see how naive that thinking was. How dangerous it is to let someone become so financially entangled in your life while telling yourself it's just love and generosity. Because eventually every debt comes due, even the ones that were supposedly gifts. And when that happens, you realize just how much power you've handed over to someone else. But at the time, I thought I had it all figured out. A beautiful apartment that impressed everyone who saw it. A boyfriend who would move heaven and earth to make me happy. And the freedom to pursue my creative career without worrying about the boring, practical stuff. It felt like the perfect setup. I should have known it was too good to last. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in April. I was curled up on the couch, the expensive one Emmett had bought, working on a logo design for a local restaurant. Emmett was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, because of course he was. The man couldn't leave a dish in the sink if his life depended on it. He came over and sat down next to me, and I could tell by his posture that he had something on his mind. You know how some people get when they're gearing up for a serious conversation? That slightly stiff, overly casual way of settling in that immediately puts you on edge. So, he said, and I already didn't like where this was going. I've been thinking about something. I saved my work and closed the laptop, giving him my attention, but already feeling defensive. What's up, Axel? Well, my lease is up in 4 months. He said like this was news to me. It wasn't. He'd mentioned it several times always, with this hopeful undertone that I'd chosen to ignore. And I was wondering if maybe it's time we started looking for a place together. Officially. There it was. The conversation I'd been dreading for months, because the truth is I'd seen it coming from a mile away. All the hints he'd been dropping, the way he'd linger at my apartment longer and longer, the casual comments about when we lived together that I'd been pretending not to hear. I mean, he continued, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. We basically spend all our time together anyway, and it would be more practical, financially speaking. We could get a 2-bedroom, maybe something with a real office space for your design work. He was trying so hard to make it sound logical, practical, like just another smart financial decision. But I could see the hope in his eyes the way he was watching my face for any sign of enthusiasm. This wasn't about practicality for him. This was about the next step, the natural progression of our relationship towards something more permanent and official. And that's exactly what terrified me. Because sitting there on that expensive couch in that beautiful apartment that he'd made possible, I realized I didn't want to take the next step with Emmett. I didn't want to officially combine our lives and our finances and our futures. The very thought of it made me feel trapped, like I was being slowly absorbed into his orderly, spreadsheet-organized world. But I couldn't say that. Not when he was looking at me with such genuine affection, not when I was surrounded by evidence of his generosity and support. So instead, I deflected. I don't know, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I'm pretty tired tonight. Can we talk about this another time? I watched his face change, just slightly, the hope dimming, the enthusiasm deflating. Oh, okay, sure, we can talk about it later. But I could tell he was disappointed. And confused, probably because, from his perspective, what was there to think about? We'd been together for 3 years. He'd just helped me set up my dream apartment, and now he was offering to make our arrangement official and permanent. In his mind, it was the obvious next move. The problem was it felt anything but obvious to me. It felt like a trap closing around me, like the end of my independence and the beginning of a life that was more about security than passion. And I know that sounds ungrateful considering everything he'd done for me, but I couldn't help how I felt. The next day I was distant, not on purpose exactly, but I couldn't shake the anxiety from our conversation. Every text from Emmett felt loaded with expectation. Every casual comment about the future felt like pressure. When he called that evening, I let it go to voicemail. When he texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner, I said I was busy with a client deadline. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did have work to do. But mostly I just needed space to think, to figure out what I actually wanted, not what made the most sense or what would make Emmett happy. And I couldn't do that with him hovering around, being helpful and sweet and making me feel guilty for having doubts. By Thursday, I knew I was being unfair. Emmett had done nothing wrong except love me and want to build a life together. But instead of having an adult conversation about my feelings, I did something much worse. I took the coward's way out. I blocked his number, blocked him on social media, just erased him from my digital life like he'd never existed. I told myself it was temporary, just until I could figure out what to say to him, just until I could find the words to explain why the idea of living together felt suffocating instead of exciting. But deep down, I think I knew what I was really doing. I was running away from a conversation I didn't want to have and a decision I wasn't ready to make. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would spiral out of control. How one moment of cowardice would set off a chain reaction that would destroy not just our relationship, but my entire carefully constructed life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before Emmett's methodical revenge, before the eviction notice and the legal papers, there was Jeffrey. And Jeffrey changed everything. I met him at the yoga studio, where I'd been taking classes for the past few months. It was one of those hot yoga places where everyone's gorgeous and flexible and makes you feel like a complete amateur. But I kept going because it was close to my apartment, and the instructor was easy on the eyes. That instructor was Jeffrey, and he was everything Emmett wasn't. Spontaneous, where Emmett was planned, creative, where Emmett was practical, exciting, where Emmett was safe. He had this energy about him that was magnetic, like he was always on the verge of some amazing adventure and might just invite you along. It started innocently enough. After class one day, he complimented my form, said I was a natural. Then it was casual conversations, after sessions, little jokes, and observations that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. He'd remember details about my life, ask about my design work, make me feel like the most interesting person in the room. The truth is, Jeffrey made me remember what it felt like to be excited about someone, to feel that flutter in your stomach when they texted, to find excuses to see them, to actually look forward to spending time together instead of just going through the motions. And yes, I know how this sounds. I know I had a boyfriend who loved me and supported me and would have done anything for me. But Jeffrey represented something different. Possibility, adventure, the chance to be someone other than the grateful girlfriend who owed her stability to someone else's generosity. Our first real conversation happened after a particularly brutal class where I'd nearly passed out from the heat. Jeffrey offered to buy me a smoothie at the place next door, and I said yes, without thinking about it. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything and nothing. Travel, art, philosophy, dreams we'd never told anyone else. You know what I love about you, he said as we were leaving. You're not like other women I meet. You've got this creative fire, this independence. It's refreshing. Independence. That word hit me like a lightning bolt, because it was exactly what I felt I was losing with Emmett. Here was someone who saw me as independent and creative and exciting, not as someone who needed taking care of. The texting started that night. Just casual conversation at first, but it quickly became the highlight of my day. Jeffrey had this way of making even mundane topics feel electric, of making me feel like I was part of some secret, exciting world that existed parallel to my regular life. I told myself it was just friendship, that I was allowed to have male friends, that Emmett was being paranoid and controlling when he'd occasionally ask about my yoga classes or wonder why I was on my phone so much. But I knew I was lying to myself. The way my heart raced when Jeffrey texted, the way I found myself thinking about him at random moments throughout the day. That wasn't friendship. The first time Jeffrey came to my apartment was 3 days after I'd blocked Emmett. I'd been spiraling, alternating between guilt about the blocking situation and excitement about this new connection with someone who saw me differently. When Jeffrey suggested coming over to check out my design portfolio, I knew it wasn't really about work, but I said yes anyway. He loved the apartment, of course. Everyone did. He wandered around admiring the furniture and the layout and the way everything came together. "This place is incredible," he said. "You've got amazing taste." I didn't mention that most of it had been paid for by the boyfriend I'd just blocked. Didn't mention that without Emmett's signature, I'd never have qualified for the lease in the first place. In that moment, with Jeffrey looking at me with such admiration, I wanted to be the kind of woman who could create this beautiful life all on her own. We ended up on the couch, Emmett's couch, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Jeffrey told me about his dreams of opening his own studio, his plans to travel to India to deepen his practice, his philosophy about living authentically and following your passion. It was intoxicating, this vision of a life driven by desire rather than duty. When he kissed me, I didn't stop him. I should have, obviously. Should have thought about Emmett, about our 3 years together, about everything he'd done for me. But in that moment, all I could think about was how alive I felt, how wanted, how free. Afterward, as Jeffrey was getting dressed, he paused to look around the apartment again. "You know, you're lucky to have all this," he said. "Most people our age are still struggling to make ends meet." Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable, but I pushed the feeling aside. He was right after all. I was lucky. And if I'd worked hard to create opportunities for that luck to find me, well, that was just smart, wasn't it? Jeffrey left around midnight, but not before making plans to see me again. As I locked the door behind him, I felt this rush of exhilaration mixed with terror. I'd just cheated on Emmett. There was no way to sugarcoat or rationalize that fact. But I'd also felt more like myself in those few hours than I had in months. I spent the rest of the night pacing around the apartment, alternating between guilt and excitement. Part of me wanted to unblock Emmett immediately, to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But a bigger part of me was already planning when I could see Jeffrey again. The next morning brought a harsh reality check in the form of persistent knocking on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Emmett standing in the hallway, looking worried and determined. My heart started racing, but not in the good way I'd felt with Jeffrey. This was pure panic. I considered not answering, but his car was parked outside and my lights were on. He knew I was home, so I took a deep breath and opened the door, trying to look casual and normal, and definitely not like someone who just cheated on her boyfriend. "Hey, B," I said, like it was totally normal for him to show up unannounced after I blocked him on everything. "Carla, what the hell is going on?" His voice was strained, and I could see the stress in his posture. "You blocked me. I've been worried sick. I thought something had happened to you." The concern in his voice made my guilt spike even higher. Here he was, genuinely worried about my well-being, and I'd been rolling around with another man on the furniture he'd bought me. I needed some space. I said, which was true, but also completely inadequate as an explanation. "Boo, space from what? From me, from us." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of his familiar cologne. "Carla, we've been together for 3 years. You can't just disappear when we have one difficult conversation." He was right, of course. What I'd done was cruel and immature and unfair. But instead of apologizing, instead of trying to explain my feelings or work through the problem together, I doubled down on the defensive. "You're being dramatic," I said. "I just needed a few days to think." "Dramatic?" His voice rose slightly. "I thought you were dead, Carla. I called your friends. I almost called your parents. When someone you love just vanishes without explanation, yeah, you get dramatic." The word love hit me like a physical blow, because I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He really did love me. Completely unconditionally, in that steady, reliable way that should have felt like a gift, but instead felt like a burden. "Look, can we not do this right now?" I said, already backing toward the door. "I told you I need time to think. About us living together, because if you're not ready, we can wait. We can take things slower. Just talk to me." The reasonableness in his voice, the willingness to compromise, the sheer patience of him, it all made me feel worse, because I knew what I was really thinking about wasn't timing or readiness. It was whether I wanted to be with him at all. But I couldn't say that. Not with Jeffrey's cologne probably still lingering in the air, not with the evidence of my betrayal literally surrounding us in the form of all the things Emmett had bought and built and arranged for me. I can't do this conversation right now, I said, my hand on the door handle. Please just give me some more time. I saw something shift in his expression then, the worry and confusion giving way to something harder, more calculating. Like he was finally seeing me clearly for the first time. Fine, he said quietly. Take all the time you need. And then he left, just like that. No argument, no pleading, no dramatic declarations. He just turned around and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway, feeling somehow worse than if he'd yelled at me. I should have known that quiet acceptance wasn't like him. Emmett didn't give up on things easily, and he definitely didn't take betrayal lying down. But I was too caught up in my own drama to recognize the warning signs. I went back inside and immediately texted Jeffrey, needing the validation and excitement he provided to wash away the guilt and confusion Emmett had left behind. We made plans for him to come over again that evening, and I spent the day alternating between anticipation and anxiety. When Jeffrey arrived, he brought wine and Thai takeout, transforming my apartment into something that felt like a romantic date rather than an affair. We ate sitting on the floor, feeding each other pad Thai and laughing about nothing in particular. It felt spontaneous and fun, and completely different from the structured planned dates I was used to with Emmett. You seem tense, Jeffrey observed as we moved to the couch afterward. Everything okay? I told him about Emmett showing up, about the confrontation, and the guilt I was feeling. Jeffrey listened with this sympathetic expression, occasionally nodding or making understanding noises. You know how, he said when I finished, it sounds like you're in a relationship that's run its course. It happens. People grow apart, want different things. The kindest thing you can do is be honest about that. It was exactly what I wanted to hear, that my feelings were valid, that I wasn't a terrible person for wanting something different, that ending things with Emmett would actually be the mature, honest choice. But it's complicated, I said. He's done so much for me. This apartment, all the furniture, I don't know how I'd manage without his help. Jeffrey was quiet for a moment, his hand tracing patterns on my arm. You know what I think? I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You don't need someone else to take care of you. You're talented, you're smart, you're capable of creating your own success. Again, exactly what I wanted to hear. That I was independent and strong and capable, not the financially dependent girlfriend I sometimes felt like with Emmett. We ended up in bed again, and this time it felt less like a mistake and more like a choice. A declaration that I was choosing excitement over security, passion over stability, my own desires over someone else's expectations. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets Emmett had bought, Jeffrey traced his fingers along my collarbone and said, I could get used to this. What do you mean, us, this whole setup? He gestured around the room. It's nice having a place to come to that feels like home. Something cold settled in my stomach at those words, but I pushed the feeling away. Jeffrey wasn't like Emmett. He wasn't trying to take over my space or make me dependent on him. He was just enjoying what we had together. But as I watched him get comfortable in my bed, in my apartment, using my shower and borrowing my towels, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just traded one complicated situation for another. The only difference was that this time I was the one with all the power and resources, and Jeffrey was the one benefiting from my generosity. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I was too caught up in the thrill of feeling wanted and desired to think too hard about the implications. That would come later, when the bills started piling up and Jeffrey's visits became more frequent, and my freelance income proved insufficient to maintain the lifestyle I'd grown accustomed to. When I realized that independence isn't just about who pays for what, it's about being able to survive the consequences of your choices. But for now, in those stolen moments with Jeffrey in the apartment Emmett had made possible, I felt free. And I was willing to pay almost any price to keep feeling that way. Almost. The reckoning came exactly 1 week after I'd blocked Emmett, and it came in the form of my landlord's voice on my voicemail. I was in the middle of what had become my new routine, working on client projects during the day while texting Jeffrey, then spending my evenings with him in what was quickly becoming our shared space rather than just mine. Ms. Mills, this is Mr. Russell from Pinnacle Property Management. I need you to call me back as soon as possible regarding your lease agreement. It's urgent. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop. Mr. Russell was usually polite but distant in our interactions, the kind of professional landlord who kept things strictly business. But there was something different in his voice now, an edge that suggested whatever he needed to discuss wasn't going to be pleasant. I called him back immediately, my hand shaking as I dialed. Ms. Mills, thank you for calling back so quickly, he said when he picked up. I'm afraid I have some concerning news. I received formal notice yesterday that your lease guarantor, Mr. Emmett Hayes, is withdrawing his support effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. What does that mean? It means that according to the terms of your lease agreement, you now have 30 days to provide a new qualified guarantor or vacate the premises. I'm required by law to send you formal notice, which you should receive by courier tomorrow. My mind was reeling. But he can't just do that, can he? I mean, doesn't he have to give more notice or something? I'm afraid the lease agreement is quite clear on this point, Ms. Mills. The guarantor has the right to withdraw their support with written notice, which triggers the 30-day cure period. I have his email right here, time-stamped, at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday. The night after our confrontation. While I was planning my evening with Jeffrey Emmett, was systematically dismantling the foundation of my entire life. This has to be some kind of mistake, I said, even though I knew it wasn't. This was exactly the kind of methodical, calculated response I should have expected from someone who approached everything in life like a chess game. I'm sorry, Ms. Mills, but the documentation is quite clear. You'll need to provide a new guarantor who meets our income and credit requirements, or we'll have to begin eviction proceedings. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence for a long time. The apartment that had felt like my sanctuary suddenly felt fragile, temporary. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration, every element of the life I'd built here. It was all contingent on a signature I'd taken for granted. My first instinct was to call Emmett and beg him to reconsider. But of course I couldn't call him. I'd blocked his number, and something told me that unblocking it now and pleading for mercy wasn't going to work. He'd made his move deliberately, strategically, and he was clearly not interested in negotiating. So I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I completely panicked. I tried calling my parents, but my dad's credit had been destroyed in their divorce 3 years earlier, and my mom was barely making ends meet on her teacher's salary. I reached out to friends, but none of them had the kind of financial stability that would qualify them as a guarantor for a lease this expensive. That's when I swallowed my pride and started crafting an email to Emmett. Multiple emails, actually, each one more desperate than the last. The first one was angry. What did you do? I just got a letter from my landlord. An eviction notice. It says you withdrew as guarantor. Is this a joke? It says I have 30 days to find a new one, or I'm out. You can't do that. Call me immediately. This is insane. When that didn't get a response, I tried guilt. Seriously, answer your phone. My dad can't do it. His credit is a mess. You know that. You're trying to make me homeless. After everything, this is how you react. This is so childish. Still nothing. So I moved on to manipulation. Okay, I know you're hurt. I should have told you about Jeffrey. I was scared. It just happened, but we can talk about this. Please don't do this to me. I love this apartment. It's my home. Our home. Remember how excited we were when we found it. Let's not throw everything away over a stupid fight. But even as I typed those words, I knew how hollow they sounded. Calling it our home when I'd been sharing it with another man. Reducing his legitimate hurt to a stupid fight. Acting like my betrayal was some minor misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with the right combination of apology and emotional manipulation. When the emails failed to generate any response, I tried a different approach. I had Jeffrey send him a message, thinking maybe hearing from a neutral third party would make Emmett see reason. Dude, I don't know what your problem is, but you need to fix this. Carla is a wreck. You're putting her in a terrible position because you got your feelings hurt. Whatever happened between you two is your business, but messing with her housing is way over the line. Man up and call her landlord back. Don't be that guy. Looking back, I can't believe I thought that would help. Having the man I'd cheated with lecture Emmett about being that guy was probably the worst possible strategy. But I was desperate and not thinking clearly. The silence from Emmett's end was deafening and terrifying. This wasn't the man I'd been with for 3 years, the one who'd rushed to fix any problem I had, who'd bend over backward to make me happy. This was someone else entirely, someone cold and calculated and completely unmoved by my distress. As the days ticked by with no response, I started to realize the true scope of what Emmett had done. This wasn't just about the apartment, it was about power control and the systematic dismantling of the life I'd built on his foundation. Because here's what I hadn't fully understood until that moment: almost everything in my life was connected to Emmett in some way. The apartment I couldn't afford without a guarantor, the furniture I couldn't have bought without his financial help, the security deposit that had come from his account, the utilities that were often paid with his credit card when my freelance income fell short. I'd thought I was maintaining my independence by keeping the lease in my name, by calling it my apartment, by making the decorating decisions. But the reality was that I'd been living a life subsidized by someone else's generosity, and now that subsidy was being withdrawn. The panic was overwhelming. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating my options, trying to figure out how to solve a problem that felt increasingly unsolvable. Jeffrey tried to be supportive, but there was only so much he could do. His own financial situation was precarious. Yoga instructors don't exactly make guarantor money. Maybe you could find a cheaper place, he suggested one evening as I spiraled into another anxiety attack about the approaching deadline. With what security deposit? I snapped. With what moving expenses? And even if I could afford to move, I'd still need a guarantor for anywhere decent. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "What about your freelance clients? Are any of them making enough money to help you out?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Jeffrey, I design logos for small businesses and do layout work for local magazines. My clients aren't exactly rolling in guarantor-level cash. The truth was starting to sink in. I was trapped. Trapped by my own choices, by my own inability to be financially independent, by my own decision to burn bridges with the one person who could have helped me. And the worst part, I was starting to realize that Emmett had probably known this would happen. He'd calculated exactly how dependent I was on his support, exactly how impossible it would be for me to replace him, exactly how devastating this move would be to my carefully constructed life. It was brilliant in a terrifying way. He hadn't yelled or made threats or tried to hurt me emotionally. He'd simply removed himself from the equation and let the natural consequences of my choices play out. But I wasn't ready to accept defeat yet. If Emmett wanted to play hardball, I could play hardball too. I just needed to figure out what leverage I had left. The problem was, as the days passed and my options dwindled, I was starting to realize that I had no leverage at all. Emmett held all the cards, and he was playing them with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else in his life. I was about to learn just how thoroughly he'd thought this through. The next phase of Emmett's campaign began with a knock on my door at exactly 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I answered it to find him standing there with a friend I didn't recognize. A tall, muscular guy who looked like he moved furniture for a living. "Hi, Carla," Emmett said, his voice politely neutral. "I'm here to collect my belong."